The Mortician's Apprentice and the body that wouldn't stay still. The corpse sat up on the embalming table and asked for a cigarette. Marcus nearly dropped the trocar he was holding and stumbled backward into the cabinet of formaldehyde, the glass bottles rattling like wind chimes in a hurricane, his heart hammering against his ribs so hard he thought it might burst right through his chest and join the dead man on the table. The body was supposed to be Harold Grimsby. 73 years old, died of a heart attack while watching television in his recliner, brought in just 2 hours ago by the coroner, who assured Marcus that this was a straightforward case. No autopsy required. Family wanted a viewing tomorrow. Simple preparation and cosmetic work. The kind of routine job that Marcus had done hundreds of times during his 3 years as an apprentice to old Mortician Blackwood. But Harold Grimsby was sitting upright now. His grey hair dishevelled his pale blue eyes, scanning the preparation room with curious interest. And when he spoke again, his voice was raspy, but perfectly clear, like someone who had just woken from a long nap. "I said I could use a smoke boy," Harold repeated, swinging his legs over the side of the table with surprising agility for a man who had been stone-cold dead for the better part of 4 hours, his bare feet touching the tiled floor with a soft slap that echoed through the basement morgue. Marcus found his voice somewhere in the depths of his terror. It came out as a strangled whisper. "You are dead, Mr. Grimsby. You died of cardiac arrest. Your daughter brought you here. You cannot be talking to me right now because dead people do not talk." Harold chuckled, a sound like autumn leaves rustling in the wind. "Well, that is what everyone keeps telling me. But here I am having a conversation with you. So either I am not as dead as advertised, or death is not quite what we expected it to be. Either way. I have been lying on that cold table for what feels like an eternity, and I am craving nicotine, something fierce." The apprentice looked around the preparation room, desperately searching for some rational explanation. Perhaps he had fallen asleep over his textbooks again. Perhaps this was another one of those vivid nightmares that had been plaguing him since he started working with the dead. Perhaps the formaldehyde fumes had finally gotten to him, and he was hallucinating. But Harold Grimsby stood before him as real as anything naked, except for the sheet that had covered him. His skin pale, but not the waxy pallor of death, his chest rising and falling with each breath. "You do realize this is impossible," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength as his initial shock began to fade into professional curiosity. "Rigor mortis should have set in by now. Your body temperature should be dropping. There should be no brain activity, no heart function, no respiratory function. You should be completely and utterly deceased." Harold shrugged, scratched his head thoughtfully. "Well, I suppose that explains why I feel so stiff," he said, rolling his shoulders and stretching his arms above his head, "and why everything seems so quiet and peaceful. Though I must say, death is not nearly as restful as they make it out to be. I have been aware of everything that has happened since I collapsed in my living room, heard the paramedics arrive, felt them load me into the ambulance, listened to my daughter cry over my body, experienced every moment of being transported here and placed on this table." This revelation sent another chill through Marcus. The idea that consciousness could persist after death was terrifying enough, but the thought that Harold had been aware during his own preparation for burial was deeply disturbing. He wondered how many other bodies had retained some spark of awareness while he worked on them. How many silent screams had gone unheard in this basement room. "I need to call Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said. Reaching for the telephone on the wall, "He will know what to do. He has been in this business for 40 years. Surely he has encountered something like this before." Harold caught his wrist with surprising strength, his fingers cold, but very much alive. "Wait just a minute there, son," he said, his eyes serious now, intense in a way that made Marcus freeze. "Before you go calling anyone, we need to discuss what exactly you plan to tell them, because I suspect they are not going to believe that I am up and walking around. And even if they do believe it, I doubt they will be happy about the situation." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to understand the implications even as he spoke the words. "Think about it," Harold said, releasing his grip and beginning to pace around the small room, examining the instruments and equipment with fascination. "What happens when word gets out that the dead are not staying dead? What happens to the funeral industry, to medical science, to religion, to everything we think we know about life and death? This discovery could change the world, or it could destroy it. depending on how people react. Marcus watched Harold examine a bottle of embalming fluid, turning it over in his hands and reading the label with interest. The surreal nature of the situation was beginning to settle into his mind, like sediment. In still water, he found himself oddly calm now. Perhaps because his scientific training was taking over. Perhaps because Harold seemed so reasonable and articulate for a dead man. "How long have you been aware?" Marcus asked. "Have you been conscious this entire time since your heart attack?" "Every single moment," Harold replied, setting down the bottle and turning to face the apprentice. It was the strangest thing. One second I was watching the evening news and feeling this crushing pain in my chest. The next second, the pain was gone, and I felt completely detached from my body. Like I was floating above it, looking down. I could see myself slumped in the chair. Could see my daughter finding me when she came to check on me. Could see the paramedics working over my body. But I could not communicate with any of them. He paused, his expression thoughtful. "It was not until just now, when you started preparing my body for embalming, that I suddenly found myself back inside it again. Able to move and speak and interact with the physical world. It was as if something about the preparation process awakened me or allowed me to return." Marcus considered this information, trying to process it through his knowledge of biology and mortuary science. There had been cases of people pronounced dead who later revived, usually due to extremely slow heartbeat or breathing that was too shallow to detect. But those cases typically involved people who had never actually died, whereas Harold had been examined by trained paramedics, and a coroner, his death had been certified by medical professionals. "What was the last thing you remember feeling while you were—" Marcus hesitated over the word dead. "Peace," Harold said immediately, "an incredible sense of peace and lightness, as if all the worries and pains and fears of life had been lifted away. I felt connected to something vast and beautiful, something that I cannot begin to describe in words. It was like being held in the arms of the universe itself, surrounded by love and understanding that went beyond anything I had ever experienced in life." "But you came back," Marcus observed. "Yes," Harold said, "and I am not entirely sure why. Perhaps it was not my time. Perhaps there is something I still need to do. Perhaps this is all part of some larger plan that I do not understand. Or perhaps the boundary between life and death is not as absolute as we believe it to be." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Not from fear this time, but from the profound implications of what Harold was suggesting. If death was not permanent, if consciousness could somehow persist and even return to the body, after clinical death, then everything humanity believed about mortality was wrong. "We need to run some tests," Marcus said, his scientific curiosity overriding his shock. "I need to check your vital signs, take your temperature, examine your pupils, document everything that is happening here." Harold nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you would say that he said I want to understand this as much as you do. But we need to be very careful about how we proceed. If word of this gets out before we understand what is happening, it could cause mass panic. Imagine what would happen if people thought their loved ones might still be conscious in their graves." The thought was horrifying. Marcus had seen enough grief-stricken families to know how desperately people clung to hope, how willing they were to believe in miracles when faced with the finality of death. If news spread that the dead might still be aware, it would destroy the peace that burial was supposed to bring to the living. Harold seemed to read his thoughts. "Exactly," he said, "we need to approach this scientifically, methodically. We need to understand the mechanisms involved before we make any decisions about what to do with this information." Marcus retrieved his medical instruments from the cabinet, his hands steady now as his professional training took over. He checked Harold's pulse and found it strong and regular, took his blood pressure and found it within normal ranges, tested his reflexes and found them responsive. Every test he performed indicated that Harold was very much alive, despite having been clinically dead for hours. "This is impossible," Marcus muttered, reviewing his findings according to every medical text I have ever read. "You should be showing signs of decomposition by now. Your cells should be breaking down. Your organs should be shutting down. There should be clear evidence of death. Yet here I am," Harold said, "fully functional and feeling better than I have in years. Actually, the arthritis in my knees is completely gone. The chronic back pain that has bothered me for decades has disappeared. Even my vision seems sharper than it was before. It is as if death somehow healed all the ailments of my aging body. Marcus made careful notes of everything Harold told him. Documenting each observation with the precision his training had instilled in him, he was beginning to formulate theories about what might be happening, wondering if Harold had experienced some kind of suspended animation rather than true death, if his body had entered a state so deep that it mimicked death while actually preserving life at a cellular level. But even that explanation did not account for Harold's claimed awareness during the period when he showed no vital signs. Consciousness required brain activity, and brain activity required oxygen, and oxygen required a functioning cardiovascular system, none of which Harold should have had while he was clinically dead. Tell me more about what you experienced while you were unconscious. Marcus said every detail you can remember, any sensations, any perceptions, anything that might help us understand what happened to you. Harold sat on the edge of the preparation table, his legs swinging slightly like a child's. It is difficult to describe because it was unlike anything from ordinary life. He began to imagine being completely free from your physical body, but still retaining all of your thoughts and memories and personality. Imagine being able to perceive everything around you, but from a perspective that transcends normal space and time. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I could sense my daughter's grief as if it were a physical presence in the room. I could feel the emotions of the paramedics as they worked on my body, their frustration and sadness when they realized they could not save me. I was aware of conversations happening in other parts of the hospital, of other people dying and being born of a vast network of consciousness that connects all living things. Marcus wrote furiously, trying to capture every detail. This description reminded him of near-death experiences he had read about in medical journals, accounts from patients who had been resuscitated after clinical death. But those cases typically involved brief periods of unconsciousness, not the extended awareness that Harold was describing. Did you see any bright lights? Marcus asked. Encounter any deceased relatives, experience anything that matched the typical near-death experience accounts? No bright tunnels or deceased grandparents, Harold said with a slight smile, though there was definitely a sense of presence of being surrounded by other consciousness, some familiar and some completely unknown. It was as if I had joined some kind of cosmic conversation that has been going on since the beginning of time. He stood up and walked to the small window near the ceiling, looking out at the darkening sky. But the strangest part was the sense of choice he continued at some point during the experience. I became aware that I could go deeper into whatever realm I had entered, or I could remain connected to the physical world. It felt like standing at a crossroads, with two very different paths stretching out before me. What made you choose to stay connected? Marcus asked. I am not sure, Harold replied. Perhaps it was concern for my daughter. She is all alone now since her mother died. Perhaps it was curiosity about what was happening to me, or perhaps something else was guiding my decision. But I felt a strong pull to remain tethered to the physical world, even as my body lay lifeless. Marcus looked up from his notes, studying Harold's face in the fluorescent light of the preparation room. The man showed no signs of the disorientation or confusion that might be expected from someone who had suffered oxygen deprivation. His speech was clear and coherent, his movements coordinated and purposeful. His mental faculties appeared to be completely intact. The telephone on the wall rang suddenly, startling both men. Marcus looked at Harold with uncertainty, unsure whether he should answer it or let it ring. After 4 rings, it stopped, then immediately began ringing again. You should answer it, Harold said. Acting normal will be important if we want to avoid suspicion. Just do not mention that your patient has gotten up and started walking around. Marcus lifted the receiver, trying to keep his voice steady. Blackwood Funeral Home. Marcus speaking. Marcus, this is Mr. Blackwood, came the familiar gravelly voice of his employer. I am calling to check on your progress with the Grimsby preparation. His daughter wants to make sure everything will be ready for the viewing tomorrow. Yes, sir, Marcus replied, glancing at Harold, who was listening with obvious interest. Everything is proceeding normally. I have completed the initial examination and am ready to begin the embalming process. Good, Blackwood said. Remember to pay special attention to the cosmetic work. The family is planning a large service, and they want him to look peaceful and natural. I will be in early tomorrow morning to review your work before the viewing. Understood, Marcus said. I will make sure everything is perfect. After hanging up the phone, Marcus turned to Harold with a troubled expression. "We have a problem," he said. "Your daughter is expecting to see your body tomorrow, and Mr. Blackwood will be here to inspect my work. I cannot exactly explain why I have not started the embalming process." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "That does present a challenge. He said we need to buy some time to figure out what is happening here, but we also need to be careful not to raise suspicions that could lead to unwanted attention." Marcus began pacing around the small room, his mind racing through possible solutions. He could claim that there had been some technical difficulty with the equipment, or that additional paperwork was required, but Blackwood was experienced enough to see through most excuses. What if we stage it? Harold suggested suddenly, what if I lie back down on the table and pretend to be dead whenever anyone else is around? That would give us time to conduct our investigation while maintaining the appearance that everything is normal. "But what about the embalming?" Marcus asked. "I cannot perform the procedure on a living person. It would be murder. And even if I could somehow fake it, your family will notice that something is wrong during the viewing." Harold was quiet for a long moment, his expression serious. "Then maybe it is time to consider telling someone what is happening," he said. "Someone we can trust to help us figure this out without causing a panic." Marcus thought about the people in his life who might be able to help with such an unprecedented situation. His professors from mortuary school were bound by academic protocols that would require them to report any unusual findings. The local doctors would likely want to hospitalize Harold for extensive testing. The religious leaders in town would probably declare it either a miracle or a hoax. "What about Dr. Evelyn Chen?" Marcus said. "Finally, she is the county medical examiner. She signed your death certificate. She has both the medical expertise and the authority to help us understand what is happening, and she has a reputation for being discreet when necessary." Harold considered this suggestion. "I remember her from the examination. He said she seemed thorough and professional, but will she believe us when we tell her that I am not actually dead?" "There is only one way to find out," Marcus replied, reaching for the telephone again. Dr. Chen answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional despite the late hour. "This is Chen." "Dr. Chen, this is Marcus from the Blackwood Funeral Home." Marcus said, "I am sorry to call so late, but I have encountered an unusual situation with one of your cases, and I need your expertise." "Which case?" Chen asked, her tone immediately becoming more focused. "Harold Grimsby. The cardiac arrest from this afternoon," Marcus said, glancing at Harold, who nodded encouragingly. "There are some anomalies in the body that I think you should examine before I proceed with the preparation." "What kind of anomalies?" Chen asked. Marcus took a deep breath. "It would be better if you could come here and see for yourself," he said. "I know this is highly irregular, but I think you will find it worth your time." There was a long pause, then Chen spoke again. "I will be there in 20 minutes. Do not disturb the body until I arrive." After hanging up, Marcus turned to Harold with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "She is coming," he said. "Now we just need to figure out how to explain this situation to her." "Let me handle it," Harold said. "I think she will be more likely to believe the evidence of her own senses than any explanation we might offer. I will simply demonstrate that I am not dead and let her draw her own conclusions." The next 20 minutes passed slowly. Marcus tried to busy himself with cleaning and organizing the preparation room, while Harold examined the various instruments and chemicals with the curiosity of someone exploring a foreign country. He asked questions about the embalming process and the techniques used to prepare bodies for burial, showing a surprisingly keen interest in the technical aspects of mortuary science. When Dr. Chen arrived, she knocked on the basement door with sharp, authoritative raps. Marcus opened it to find a small Asian woman in her 50s, wearing a practical grey suit and carrying a medical bag. Her dark eyes were alert and intelligent behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Where is the anomaly?" she asked without preamble, stepping into the preparation room and looking around with the practiced eye of someone who had seen thousands of bodies in various states. "Mr. Grimsby," Marcus said, gesturing toward the preparation table, where Harold had resumed his position, lying on his back covered by the sheet. Dr. Chen approached the table and pulled back the sheet, immediately beginning a visual examination of the body. She noted the skin tone checked. The eyes felt for pulse points, her movements efficient and methodical. "What exactly did you observe that seemed unusual?" she asked, continuing her examination. That was when Harold opened his eyes and smiled at her. Dr. Chen jumped backwards so quickly that she knocked over a tray of instruments, the metal tools clattering across the floor, as she stared at Harold in complete shock, her professional composure shattered by the impossible sight before her. Good evening, Dr. Chen, Harold said, sitting up on the table. I believe we met earlier today under different circumstances. The medical examiner stood frozen for several seconds, her mind apparently struggling to process what she was seeing. Then her training reasserted itself and she stepped forward again, her expression shifting from shock to intense scientific interest. This is impossible, she said, reaching for Harold's wrist to check his pulse. You were clinically dead when I examined you this afternoon. No heartbeat, no respiratory function, fixed and dilated pupils, body temperature dropping. I certified your death myself. Yet here I am, Harold replied, allowing her to take his pulse, very much alive and apparently none the worse for wear. In fact, I feel better than I have in years. Dr. Chen listened to Harold's heart with her stethoscope, checked his blood pressure, examined his pupils with a penlight, performed every test she could think of to verify signs of life. Every measurement she took confirmed that Harold was indeed alive and healthy. This contradicts everything we know about human biology. She muttered, more to herself than to Harold or Marcus. Death is supposed to be irreversible. Once cellular death begins, there is no mechanism for reversing the process. Harold nodded sympathetically. I understand your confusion. He said, I am quite confused myself, but I can assure you that I am very much alive and aware. I have been conscious throughout the entire experience, from the moment of my apparent death until now. Dr. Chen pulled up a chair and sat down heavily, her scientific worldview clearly shaken by what she was witnessing. Tell me everything, she said, every detail of what you experienced, every sensation, every perception. I need to understand what happened to you. Harold repeated his account of the experience, describing the sense of peace and connection he had felt while clinically dead, the awareness of his surroundings, despite his body showing no vital signs, the choice he had felt between moving on to whatever comes after death or remaining connected to the physical world. Dr. Chen listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes in a small notebook she had pulled from her bag. Her initial shock was giving way to intense professional fascination as she tried to make sense of the unprecedented situation. Have you experienced anything like this before? She asked Harold. Any near-death experiences, any episodes of unconsciousness or cardiac arrest? Nothing like this, Harold replied. I have been in good health most of my life. No major medical issues, no previous heart problems. The attack that killed me came completely without warning. Dr. Chen turned to Marcus. You said you observed anomalies. What exactly did you notice when you began the preparation? Marcus described how Harold had suddenly sat up and begun speaking, how he had shown no signs of decomposition or rigor mortis, despite being dead for hours, how all of his vital signs were normal when tested. This challenges everything we understand about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical death. Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with wonder and concern. If consciousness can persist after clinical death and even return to reanimate the body, then we need to completely reconsider our understanding of what death actually means. The three of them sat in silence for several minutes, each trying to process the implications of what they were witnessing. Finally, Dr. Chen spoke again. We need to conduct extensive tests, she said, blood work, brain scans, cellular analysis, everything we can think of to understand what is happening at a biological level. But we also need to be extremely careful about how we proceed. If word of this gets out before we understand it, the consequences could be catastrophic. Harold nodded in agreement. That is exactly what I told Marcus, he said. People are not ready for this kind of revelation. It would shake the foundations of medicine, religion, philosophy, everything we believe about life and death. Dr. Chen stood up and began pacing around the small room, her mind clearly racing through the scientific and practical challenges they faced. We need a secure location where we can conduct research without attracting attention. She said, we need equipment and supplies. We need to maintain absolute secrecy while we investigate. What about your laboratory at the county facility? Marcus suggested. Surely you have the resources there to conduct the necessary tests. Too many people, Dr. Chen replied. Too many questions. If I start running unusual tests on someone who is supposed to be dead, we need somewhere completely private and secure. Harold cleared his throat. If I may make a suggestion, he said, I own a small cabin about an hour outside of town. Completely isolated, no neighbors for miles. It might not have all the equipment you need, but it would provide the privacy we require. Dr. Chen considered this option. We would need to transport medical equipment there, she said. Set up a temporary laboratory. It would be complex, but it might be our best option for conducting research without attracting attention. But what about tomorrow? Marcus asked, your daughter is expecting to see your body. Mr. Blackwood will be here to inspect my work. We cannot simply disappear without explanation. Harold thought for a moment, then smiled. I have an idea. He said, what if I really am dead tomorrow? What if I can control this ability to return to life, switch it on and off as needed? What do you mean? Dr. Chen asked. Well, Harold said I chose to return to my body tonight. Perhaps I can choose to leave it again, temporarily, become truly dead for the purposes of the viewing, and then return later, when we have more privacy to conduct our research. That is an enormous risk, Dr. Chen said. What if you cannot return? What if whatever mechanism allowed you to come back tonight does not work a second time? Harold shrugged. Everything about this situation is risky, he said. But I think it is our best chance to buy the time we need while avoiding unwanted attention. Marcus was troubled by the idea of Harold voluntarily returning to a state of death, even temporarily, but he could not think of any better alternatives that would allow them to maintain secrecy while conducting their investigation. If you are willing to try it, Dr. Chen said slowly, I can monitor your vital signs throughout the process. Document everything that happens, be ready to attempt resuscitation if something goes wrong. Harold nodded decisively. Then let us proceed, he said. Science requires taking risks in the pursuit of knowledge, and understanding what is happening to me is more important than playing it safe. Dr. Chen retrieved additional monitoring equipment from her car, while Marcus prepared the preparation room for what might be the strangest experiment in medical history. They attached electrodes to Harold's chest to monitor his heart rhythm, placed sensors to track his brain activity, prepared emergency resuscitation equipment in case something went wrong. Are you ready? Dr. Chen asked, her finger poised over the recording equipment. Harold lay back on the preparation table and closed his eyes. I am ready, he said, his voice calm and confident. I will try to return to the state I was in before, and then come back to life again in a few hours when it is safe to continue our research. What followed was one of the most remarkable things Marcus had ever witnessed. Harold's breathing gradually slowed and became more shallow. His heart rate dropped steadily on the monitor. His brain activity decreased until the waves were barely registering. Within 10 minutes, all vital signs had ceased, and Harold appeared to be clinically dead once again. Dr. Chen checked for pulse-tested reflexes, examined pupils, confirmed that Harold showed no signs of life. Yet there was something different about this death, something that seemed less final than the deaths Marcus had encountered in his work. We wait, Dr. Chen said, setting up monitoring equipment to record any changes in Harold's condition. If he can truly control this process, then he should be able to return when he chooses to do so. The next few hours passed slowly. Marcus tried to catch some sleep on the couch in Blackwood's office, while Dr. Chen maintained her vigil over Harold's body, monitoring for any signs of returning life, taking notes on every observation, no matter how small. At dawn, Mr. Blackwood arrived to inspect Marcus's work, finding everything exactly as he would expect for a standard preparation. Harold's body showed appropriate signs of death. The cosmetic work was acceptable. Everything appeared normal for a routine funeral service. Beautiful work. Blackwood told Marcus, the family will be pleased. You have given their father dignity in death, and that is the greatest gift our profession can provide. Marcus nodded and accepted the praise, all the while wondering if Harold was somehow aware of the conversation, listening from whatever realm he now inhabited, waiting for the right moment to return to life. The viewing proceeded without incident. Harold's daughter and relatives paid their respects to what they believed was his lifeless body, sharing memories and finding comfort in the ritual of saying goodbye, unaware that their loved one might be experiencing their grief from some other plane of existence. After the last mourner had left and the funeral home was locked for the night, Dr. Chen emerged from her hiding place in the basement and checked Harold's vital signs again. Still, no heartbeat, no brain activity, no response to any stimuli. It has been 18 hours, she told Marcus, much longer than his previous death. I am beginning to worry that something has gone wrong, that he cannot return this time. Marcus looked down at Harold's peaceful face, trying to detect any sign of the consciousness that had been so vibrant just a day before. Give him more time, he said. Perhaps returning from death requires more effort when the body has been dead longer. They waited through another night, taking turns monitoring Harold's condition, looking for any sign that he was trying to return to life. But the hours passed without any change in his status. On the third day, Dr. Chen was preparing to officially declare the experiment a failure. When Harold's eyes suddenly opened, he drew a deep breath and sat up on the table, looking around with the same alert curiosity he had shown before. "Welcome back, Marcus," said relief flooding through his voice. "We were beginning to think you were not coming back." Harold smiled and stretched his arms above his head. The experience was even more profound. "This time," he said, "I went much deeper into whatever realm exists beyond death. I encountered other consciousness. There learned things about the nature of existence that I cannot even begin to explain." Dr. Chen immediately began checking his vital signs, confirming that he was once again fully alive and healthy. "Tell us what you learned." She said every detail could be important for understanding what is happening to you. Harold sat on the edge of the table, gathering his thoughts. "Death is not an ending," he said. "It is a transition, a doorway into a different kind of existence. Consciousness does not depend on the physical brain the way we think it does. It is something far more fundamental, something that connects all living things across space and time." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "But there is something else, something that concerns me about what I learned while I was gone." "What is it?" Marcus asked. "I am not the only one," Harold said. "There are others who have experienced this same phenomenon. People who have died and returned, people who have learned to move between life and death at will. And they are not all benevolent." Dr. Chen and Marcus exchanged worried glances. "What do you mean?" Dr. Chen asked. Harold stood up and walked to the small window, staring out at the cemetery beyond. "Some of those who have gained this ability are using it for harmful purposes." He said they die to escape consequences for their actions, return to life to continue causing harm, disappear again when pursued. They have become essentially immortal and completely unaccountable. This revelation added a terrifying new dimension to their discovery. If the ability to return from death could be learned or developed, then it might spread beyond isolated cases like Harold's, creating a new class of beings who existed outside the normal rules of life and death. "We need to understand how this works." Dr. Chen said how some people develop this ability while others do not. What triggers it, how it can be controlled or prevented if necessary. Harold nodded. "That is why I came back," he said, "to help you understand this phenomenon before it spreads and causes irreparable harm to the world. We have a responsibility to study this carefully and develop safeguards." Over the following weeks, the three of them established a secret research facility at Harold's isolated cabin. Dr. Chen arranged for medical equipment to be delivered under false pretenses. Marcus took leave from his job at the funeral home, claiming a family emergency. Together, they began the most important scientific investigation of their lives. Their research revealed that Harold's ability to return from death was linked to specific brainwave patterns that occurred during deep meditation or near-death experiences. Certain individuals seemed naturally predisposed to developing this capability, particularly those who had experienced significant trauma or loss in their lives. They discovered that the consciousness that persisted after death was not localized to the brain, but appeared to be a fundamental property of the universe itself, something that connected all living beings in ways that science was only beginning to understand. But their research also confirmed Harold's warnings about the potential for abuse. They found evidence of at least 12 other individuals who had developed similar abilities, some of whom were using their immortality to commit crimes and evade justice. Others who had become detached from human morality after spending too much time in the realm beyond death. As word of their research began to leak out, despite their efforts at secrecy, they found themselves at the center of a controversy that threatened to tear apart the fabric of society. Religious leaders declared their findings either blasphemous or miraculous. Depending on their theological perspectives, scientists demanded access to their data and test subjects. Government agencies began investigating the national security implications of immortal citizens. Harold continued to serve as their primary test subject, dying and returning dozens of times as they refined their understanding of the process. But each journey into death changed him subtly, making him more detached from ordinary human concerns, more focused on the cosmic perspective he gained from his experiences beyond life. Marcus noticed these changes with growing concern, watching as his friend gradually became less human and more something else entirely. The Harold who returned from death was still recognizably the same person, but with each resurrection, he seemed to care less about the physical world and the people in it. Dr. Chen documented everything, meticulously building a comprehensive database of information about the death and resurrection phenomenon, but she also began to worry about the long-term consequences of their research, both for Harold personally and for humanity as a whole. The breakthrough came when they discovered that the ability to return from death could be blocked by specific electromagnetic fields frequencies that disrupted the connection between consciousness and the physical body. It was a defensive measure that could potentially be used to prevent the abuse of immortality. But their research had attracted too much attention. Government agents arrived at the cabin one morning, demanding access to their findings, claiming national security concerns that overrode any considerations of scientific ethics or personal privacy. Harold chose that moment to demonstrate the ultimate consequence of his abilities. He died one final time, but instead of returning to his body, he used his consciousness to communicate directly with the minds of everyone present, sharing with them the cosmic perspective he had gained from his journeys beyond death. The experience was overwhelming for the agents, who found themselves suddenly aware of the interconnectedness of all life, the illusory nature of individual identity, the profound peace that exists beyond the fear and suffering of mortal existence. Several of them collapsed from the psychological shock of having their consciousness temporarily expanded beyond normal human limits. When Harold's body remained lifeless after several hours, it became clear that he had chosen to remain in the realm beyond death, permanently leaving behind only his research notes and the memories of those who had worked with him. Dr. Chen and Marcus were left to decide what to do with their revolutionary discoveries. They could publish their findings and risk unleashing chaos as people desperately sought to achieve immortality, or they could suppress the research and allow the secret to die with Harold. In the end, they chose a middle path, releasing carefully edited versions of their data that confirmed the persistence of consciousness after death, without revealing the specific techniques for achieving resurrection. Their published papers sparked intense debate in scientific and religious communities, but did not provide enough information for others to replicate Harold's abilities. Marcus returned to his work at the funeral home with a completely changed perspective on death and dying. He treated each body with even greater reverence, knowing that some spark of awareness might still be present. He comforted grieving families with genuine conviction that their loved ones continued to exist in some form beyond death. Dr. Chen established a discrete research foundation dedicated to studying consciousness and its relationship to physical death, working to understand the phenomenon while developing safeguards against its potential abuse. She recruited other scientists who had encountered similar cases, building a network of researchers committed to protecting humanity from the dangers of uncontrolled immortality. Years passed, and the immediate controversy surrounding their research faded as other scientific discoveries captured public attention. But Marcus and Dr. Chen continued their work in secret, monitoring for signs that others had developed. Harold's abilities ready to intervene if the power to return from death threatened to destabilize society. They occasionally received reports of individuals who seemed to survive fatal accidents or recover from terminal illnesses in ways that defied medical explanation. But most of these cases could be attributed to misdiagnosis or exceptional but natural healing processes rather than genuine resurrection from death. The true test of their vigilance came 5 years after Harold's final departure, when Marcus received a call from a funeral home in Chicago. The director there described a case remarkably similar to what they had experienced: a woman who had died in a car accident and then awakened during her preparation for burial, displaying the same awareness and abilities that Harold had demonstrated. Marcus and Dr. Chen traveled to Chicago, immediately finding themselves face to face with Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old teacher who had been killed instantly when her car was struck by a drunk driver. Her death had been witnessed by multiple people, confirmed by paramedics and emergency room doctors. Yet she had returned to life after 6 hours in the morgue. Unlike Harold, Sarah seemed troubled by her experience. She spoke of encountering malevolent presences in the realm beyond death, entities that had tried to prevent her return to life, beings that fed on the fear and suffering of souls trapped between life and death. She described a growing conflict in the afterlife between those who sought to maintain the natural order of death and resurrection, and those who wanted to exploit the boundary between worlds. For their own purposes, Harold had mentioned encountering other consciousness during his journeys, but had never described anything as sinister as what Sarah reported. Dr. Chen conducted the same battery of tests they had performed on Harold, confirming that Sarah was indeed alive and healthy, despite having been clinically dead for hours. But her brain scans showed unusual patterns of activity in regions associated with fear and trauma, suggesting that her experience of death had been far more disturbing than Harold's peaceful transitions. Sarah agreed to participate in their research, but insisted on maintaining her normal life as much as possible. She returned to her teaching job after her supposed death was explained as a case of misdiagnosis, though she struggled with the psychological impact of knowing that death was not the final ending she had always believed it to be. Her ability to die and return proved less controllable than Harold's had been. She would sometimes slip into death spontaneously during moments of stress or strong emotion, disappearing from the physical world for hours or days before managing to return. Each journey left her more disturbed and fearful about what she had encountered on the other side. Through Sarah, they learned that the realm beyond death was far more complex than Harold had revealed. It contained multiple levels or dimensions, some peaceful and benevolent like the space Harold had described, others filled with predatory entities that sought to trap consciousness and prevent souls from moving on to whatever came after death. Sarah's account suggested that some people who developed the ability to return from death became lost in these darker realms, their consciousness trapped by malevolent beings who used them as sources of energy or entertainment. She had encountered several such trapped souls during her journeys and had barely escaped the same fate herself. This revelation forced Dr. Chen and Marcus to reconsider their understanding of the phenomenon. What they had initially seen as a miraculous expansion of human potential now appeared to be fraught with spiritual dangers that could trap people in states of suffering far worse than ordinary death. They began developing techniques to help Sarah control her transitions between life and death, teaching her meditation and visualization methods that could anchor her consciousness to the physical world, protecting her from the entities that sought to claim her during her journeys beyond life. Their research took on new urgency when they realized that the number of people developing resurrection abilities was increasing not dramatically, but steadily, suggesting that some kind of evolutionary or spiritual change was occurring in humanity, one that could lead to widespread chaos if not properly understood and managed. Sarah proved to be a valuable research partner despite the trauma of her experiences. Her ability to navigate the dangerous aspects of the death realm provided crucial information about the risks and challenges that others might face. She helped them develop protective techniques and warning signs that could prevent people from becoming trapped in the afterlife. But their work was complicated by the arrival of government agents who had been tracking reports of unexplained resurrections across the country. These officials represented a classified program designed to study and potentially weaponize any paranormal phenomena that might have military applications. The agents were led by Colonel Patricia Hawthorne, a stern woman in her 50s, who had spent decades investigating reports of psychic phenomena and supernatural events for various intelligence agencies. She made it clear that she considered the resurrection phenomenon to be a matter of national security that required immediate government oversight. Marcus and Dr. Chen found themselves caught between their scientific ethics and the demands of national security. They wanted to continue their research independently, but lacked the resources to resist government pressure. Colonel Hawthorne offered them unlimited funding and access to advanced equipment in exchange for complete cooperation with the military program. Sarah was adamantly opposed to any government involvement. She had seen enough of the darker aspects of the death realm to know that the ability to return from death could be used for terrible purposes. If it fell into the wrong hands, she threatened to disappear permanently into death, rather than allow her abilities to be studied by military researchers. The conflict came to a head when Colonel Hawthorne attempted to place Sarah under protective custody, claiming that her abilities made her too valuable and dangerous to remain in civilian hands. Sarah responded by dying instantly and remaining dead for 3 days, during which time she was technically beyond the reach of any earthly authority. When she returned, Sarah brought disturbing news from the death realm. She had encountered other individuals who had been recruited by government programs in various countries, people whose consciousness had been modified or controlled by advanced technology. that allowed their handlers to direct their activities in both life and death. According to Sarah, these government operatives were being used for espionage and assassination, able to infiltrate secure locations by dying and returning to life behind enemy lines, immune to conventional security measures, because dead bodies aroused no suspicion capable of gathering intelligence from the consciousness of other dead people they encountered in the afterlife. The implications were terrifying if multiple governments were already weaponizing the resurrection phenomenon. Then the peaceful scientific research that Marcus and Dr. Chen had envisioned was no longer possible. They were dealing with a new form of warfare that could destabilize the entire world. Colonel Hawthorne confirmed Sarah's reports when confronted with the evidence. She revealed that the United States had been studying resurrection abilities for over a decade. Ever since the first confirmed cases had been reported by military medical personnel. Other nations had similar programs, and the technology for controlling and directing resurrected individuals was advancing rapidly. The race was on to develop defenses against resurrection-based attacks. The electromagnetic field generators that Dr. Chen had designed could potentially block unwanted resurrections, but they would need to be deployed on a massive scale to protect critical infrastructure and sensitive locations. Sarah volunteered to serve as a double agent of sorts, using her abilities to gather intelligence about foreign resurrection programs, while pretending to cooperate with Colonel Hawthorne's researchers. It was dangerous work that required her to venture deep into the hostile regions of the Death Realm where enemy agents operated. Marcus found himself thrust into a role as a technical consultant for the government program, his knowledge of mortuary science proving valuable for understanding how resurrection abilities interacted with the physical processes of death. He helped develop techniques for identifying individuals who might have resurrection capabilities before they died. Dr. Chen became the lead researcher for defensive technologies, working around the clock to improve the electromagnetic field generators and develop new methods for detecting and countering resurrection-based infiltration. Her work was classified at the highest levels, and she was forbidden from publishing any of her findings. The secret war between resurrection-capable agents escalated rapidly. Attacks and counterattacks occurred in both the physical world and the realm of death. Traditional concepts of national security became obsolete when enemies could literally rise from the dead to continue their missions. Sarah's reports from her espionage missions painted a grim picture of the Death Realm. She described vast armies of consciousness controlled by various governments and organizations, battles between different factions of the dead, entire regions of the afterlife that had been militarized and fortified against intrusion. The most disturbing development was the discovery that some resurrection-capable individuals had begun establishing their own power bases in the Death Realm, creating hierarchies and territories that existed independently of any earthly government. These rogue operators posed a threat to both the living and the dead. Marcus began to understand why Harold had chosen to remain permanently in the afterlife. The responsibilities and dangers of straddling both worlds had become too great for any individual to bear. The simple miracle of returning from death had evolved into a cosmic nightmare that threatened the fundamental order of existence. The breaking point came when Sarah encountered Harold during one of her missions. She found him serving as a guardian of sorts, protecting newly dead souls from the various predators and manipulators that had invaded the Death Realm. He had become something beyond human, a being of pure consciousness, dedicated to maintaining some semblance of order in the chaos. Harold's message to the living world was simple, but chilling. The barrier between life and death was breaking down due to the increasing number of people who could cross between worlds. If the phenomenon continued to spread unchecked, it would eventually merge the realms, completely creating a reality where death had no meaning and chaos reigned supreme. The only solution was to find a way to restore the natural boundary between life and death, to prevent further resurrections while helping those already trapped between worlds to choose either full life or complete death. It would require unprecedented cooperation between all the governments and organizations that had been exploiting resurrection abilities. Sarah delivered Harold's ultimatum to Colonel Hawthorne and the other military leaders. They had 6 months to begin dismantling their resurrection programs and implementing the protective measures that Dr. Chen had developed. If they refused, Harold and his allies would take more direct action to restore the natural order. The governments of the world faced an impossible choice: abandon their most powerful new weapon systems, or risk a war with beings who existed beyond death and possessed capabilities that defied all conventional understanding. The stakes could not have been higher, and the time for decision was running out. Marcus watched these developments with a mixture of fascination and horror. The quiet funeral home where he had first encountered Harold seemed like a relic from a simpler time when death was final and the dead stayed buried. Now he found himself at the center of a conflict that would determine the future of human existence itself. Dr. Chen worked feverishly to complete her defensive technologies, knowing that they represented humanity's best hope for surviving the crisis that was rapidly approaching her electromagnetic field. Generators had evolved into sophisticated systems capable of stabilizing the boundary between life and death across large areas. Sarah continued her dangerous missions into the Death Realm, serving as humanity's ambassador to Harold and his growing alliance of consciousness dedicated to restoring natural order. Each journey took a toll on her sanity and humanity, but she persisted out of a sense of duty to both the living and the dead. The 6-month deadline approached with no sign that the world's governments were willing to abandon their resurrection programs. Military leaders argued that doing so would leave them vulnerable to enemies who continued to develop such capabilities. Intelligence agencies insisted that the technology was too valuable to surrender. Harold's response was swift and decisive. Resurrection-capable agents around the world began dying permanently, their consciousness severed from their bodies by techniques that Harold and his allies had developed in the Death Realm within days. The various government programs lost most of their operatives. Colonel Hawthorne demanded that Dr. Chen's team find a way to protect their remaining agents from Harold's attacks. But the electromagnetic field generators were designed to prevent resurrections, not to shield people who were already capable of moving between worlds. Adapting the technology would require months of research that they did not have. Sarah served as a mediator between Harold's faction and the military leadership negotiating for more time, while trying to convince both sides to find a peaceful solution, but the positions seemed irreconcilable. Harold insisted on complete cessation of resurrection research, while the governments demanded guarantees of security against foreign programs. The conflict escalated when Harold demonstrated his power by causing the simultaneous death of every resurrection-capable individual in a major city. The deaths appeared natural, but the timing was too precise to be coincidental. It was a warning that he could eliminate anyone who threatened the stability of the boundary between worlds. Marcus found himself questioning everything he had believed about right and wrong. Harold's actions were protecting the natural order, but they also involved the deliberate killing of human beings. Even if those beings could return from death, they still experienced the trauma and suffering of repeated dying. Dr. Chen made a breakthrough that changed the entire dynamic of the conflict. She discovered that the electromagnetic field generators could be modified to not just prevent resurrections, but to actually strengthen the boundary between life and death, making it impossible for consciousness to cross between worlds in either direction. This technology offered a permanent solution to the crisis. It could be deployed globally to restore the natural order and prevent any future resurrection abilities from developing. But it would also mean that everyone currently capable of moving between worlds would be trapped in whichever realm they happened to be in when the fields were activated. Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her life. She could remain in the physical world and lose her connection to the death realm forever, or she could join Harold and the others in the afterlife, knowing that she would never be able to return. Either choice meant giving up part of herself permanently. The world's governments agreed to Dr. Chen's proposal, after Harold demonstrated that he could kill their entire populations if necessary. They would implement the boundary-strengthening technology simultaneously across the globe, creating a new stability between life and death that would prevent future crises. Sarah chose to remain in the physical world, accepting that she would lose her resurrection abilities when the electromagnetic fields were activated. She wanted to continue helping people understand and cope with death in its natural form, rather than pursuing the artificial immortality that had caused so much chaos. Harold sent a final message through Sarah before the boundary was sealed. He thanked them for their efforts to understand and control the resurrection phenomenon, but warned that humanity's curiosity about death would always pose risks. Future generations would need to be vigilant against the temptation to cross boundaries that were meant to remain intact. On the appointed day, Dr. Chen activated her global network of electromagnetic field generators. The effect was immediate and permanent. The boundary between life and death solidified into an impermeable barrier that consciousness could not cross. Harold and the others who had chosen to remain in the afterlife were cut off from the physical world forever. Marcus returned to his work at the funeral home with a profound appreciation for the finality of death. He knew that the bodies he prepared would never again sit up and ask for cigarettes. The dead would remain dead as nature intended. Families could find peace in the knowledge that their loved ones had truly passed on to whatever comes after life. Dr. Chen published carefully edited accounts of their research describing the theoretical possibility of consciousness surviving death without revealing the specific techniques that had made resurrection possible. Her work contributed to a new understanding of the relationship between mind and brain, while maintaining the protective secrecy that prevented future crises. Sarah became a counselor, specializing in grief and bereavement, using her unique experience with death to help others find comfort and acceptance. When faced with loss, she never spoke publicly about her time as a resurrection-capable individual, but her insights into the nature of mortality helped countless people find peace. The world gradually returned to normal as memories of the resurrection crisis faded into classified files and urban legends. Death resumed its role as the final mystery that gave meaning to life. People continued to grieve their losses and celebrate their existence without the terrifying knowledge that the boundary between worlds could be crossed. Marcus often thought about Harold during quiet moments in the preparation room, wondering what his friend had found in the permanent afterlife he had chosen. Whether the cosmic perspective that had gradually consumed his humanity had brought him happiness, or merely a different kind of existence beyond human understanding. Sometimes when working alone in the basement morgue, Marcus would pause and listen, carefully hoping to detect some sign that Harold was still watching over the boundary between worlds, protecting the living from the dangers that lurked beyond death. But the silence was complete and reassuring. The electromagnetic field generators hummed quietly in hidden locations around the world, maintaining the barrier that kept life and death in their proper spheres. Dr. Chen's technology had become humanity's invisible guardian against the chaos that had once threatened to merge all existence into a single unstable realm. Years passed, and new apprentices came to work at the funeral home. Marcus taught them the traditional techniques of mortuary science, without ever mentioning the extraordinary events that had once turned their profession into the front line of a cosmic war. The dead stayed dead, and that was exactly as it should be. But late at night, when thunder rolled across the cemetery and lightning illuminated the headstones, Marcus would sometimes remember the night when Harold Grimsby sat up on the preparation table and asked for a cigarette. The beginning of an adventure that had taken them to the very edge of existence, and back again, a secret that would die with him when his own time came to cross the boundary that could no longer be recrossed. The story of the Mortician's apprentice and the body that wouldn't stay still had ended not with answers, but with the restoration of mystery. Death had reclaimed its rightful place as the final frontier that no living person could explore, and return to describe the ultimate secret that gave weight and meaning to every moment of life. Marcus grew old in the service of the dead, helping families say goodbye to their loved ones with the quiet dignity that his profession demanded. He never again encountered a body that refused to stay still, and he was grateful for that mercy. Some boundaries were meant to remain intact, and some mysteries were too dangerous to solve. When his own time came, Marcus faced death with curiosity rather than fear, wondering if he would encounter Harold in whatever realm awaited beyond the electromagnetic barriers that now kept the worlds separate, hoping that his old friend had found peace in the cosmic perspective that had claimed his humanity so many years ago. The funeral home continued its work under new management, serving families who would never know how close their world had come to merging with the realm of the dead. The apprentices who learned their trade in the basement preparation room worked with bodies that stayed properly still, as bodies should, maintaining the natural order that had been restored at such great cost. And in the depths of the afterlife, beyond the reach of electromagnetic fields or human understanding, Harold Grimsby watched over the boundary between worlds with the patience of eternity, ensuring that the dead would remain dead and the living could continue their brief dance with mortality, in blessed ignorance of the chaos that had once threatened to consume everything they held dear. The end had become a true ending. Once again, death had reclaimed its finality, and the universe settled back into the rhythm of life and loss that had sustained existence since the beginning of time. The Mortician's apprentice had learned his greatest lesson, that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, and some boundaries were too sacred to cross. Marcus Blackwood died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. His body prepared for burial by apprentices who would never know the secret history of their profession. He was laid to rest in the cemetery behind the funeral home, where he had spent his life serving the dead. His headstone bearing the simple inscription that he had chosen here lies one who learned when to stop asking questions. The electromagnetic field generators continued their silent vigil humming with the power that kept the world separate. Dr. Chen's legacy lived on in the technology that protected humanity from the temptation to cross forbidden boundaries, and somewhere beyond the veil of death, Harold Grimsby continued his eternal watch over the cosmic order that they had fought so hard to restore. The story was finished. The crisis resolved, the boundary secured. Death had returned to its proper place as the final mystery that no living person could solve, and the world was safer for the knowledge that some secrets should remain forever hidden in the realm beyond the reach of mortal understanding, where the dead stay dead and the living are free to make the most of their brief time in the light.